welcome to the Intuitive Insights podcast series. I'm Nina Lockwood, founder and director of Intuitive Interim and Executive Search. Throughout this series, I will be sharing engaging conversations with talented leaders from across the UK transport sector. Today, I am delighted to welcome Caroline Donaldson, who is Managing Director of the West Coast Partnership Development Shadow Operator for High Speed 2. Since joining Railtrack in 1999, at a time when the industry was still recovering from the impacts of privatisation, Caroline has held a series of senior posts, including winning the West Coast franchise competition not once but twice as bid director for First Group. She now leads the development of the High Speed 2 Shadow Operator for First Trenitalia, which in my view is one of the most exciting programmes happening in transport at the moment. I always find Caroline's insights interesting, and I hope that you enjoy our conversation on this episode of Intuitive Insights. Caroline, hello. It's absolutely joy to see you. Thank you for joining me on the Intuitive Insights podcast. I was having a think before we started the recording the podcast today when I first met you, and I had to take my mind back to the DFT Rail Industry Day at the QE2 Conference Centre, which I think was April 2014. And
you could be right.
I was quite new to the industry, and I'd got an invitation. I've no idea how, but somebody invited me, and all of a sudden I was surrounded by what felt like the great and the good of the rail industry. It was very exciting, and that's where you and I met. And obviously we've met many times since then. I've really enjoyed getting to know you, but I'm interested to hear more about your career and kind of getting that story out there today. So going into the podcast and talking about your career, I know at the moment, obviously, you're Managing Director for West Coast Partnership Development for the Shadow Operator for High Speed 2. I know how hard you worked to get that one over the line, so I was so delighted for you when the news came in that that First Group and Trenitalia had won that bid. Very exciting. But can we go back a bit? Can we go back into the history books a little bit and tell me about how you got into the rail industry in the first place, and your career bringing you to where you are today?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I guess like a lot of people, Nina, the initial attraction wasn't so much the industry as the role. So I joined Railtrack in 1999, and I was attracted to that opportunity through a newspaper advert, actually. But what really excited me about the opportunity, I suppose, was the opportunity to make a real difference in an industry which of itself makes such a significant difference to people's quality of life. It did prove to be an exceptionally interesting opportunity, because I actually ended up joining about 2 weeks after the sad Paddington rail crash at that time. But of course, it was an enormous time of change for the company itself and for the industry. And since then, we've improved on what was already a really good base, but some of the attention that's been paid to drive up safety, to drive up reliability and punctuality has been just great to be a part of. And there's always something challenging and interesting to be a part of. And I think that's just one of the great things about being part of the rail business.
Yeah, absolutely. So you joined Railtrack from a newspaper ad. I'm interested to know whether when you landed, what was surprising, or did you get what you expected, or is the rail industry quite different to what you might have thought before you joined?
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually, and one I haven't thought about that for a long while. So I'm going to have to cast my mind back and to a good 20 years, shall we say. I'm not sure I had any specific expectations, but I suppose for like most customers, because that's what I'd been previously, because the railway, has a minute to the minute timetable. I expected that to have a really big influence, if you like, on the way the business runs. And of course, a lot of it is. And so you've got a huge focus on delivering the same thing day in, day out, in a good way, and quite rightly, and in some cases a kind of military precision about that. But on the other hand, I think it was relatively recent, it was just a few years after privatisation, and the industry was still recovering, from the pulling apart effectively of British Rail into, hundreds of different companies. And actually, a lot of the processes and the commercial arrangements around all of that were still really, people were trying to work out, how did it work? What was the right skill sets that were needed? So you had this big kind of contrast between, in operational terms, an industry that really knew what it was doing, but much of the kind of wider management was still really early stages of development.
Yeah, and what an exciting time to be in the industry. And so from being at Railtrack, what happened next? Where did you go?
Well, it's sort of everything changed, but where I was really, I suppose. So as most people remember, that Railtrack went through huge changes in the next couple of years, again, largely from the influence of some very sad accidents, but ones that the industry used to kind of build and improve on. And of course, the Hatfield rail accident and the huge impact on the industry timetable and the recovery plan that was needed after that was a time of, I think, enormous learning, because we had to really put in place some really good industry-wide kind of project management and coherence and collaboration. And in a way, I think many of the businesses were almost, particularly Railtrack, fighting for its life, and of course didn't actually survive through that. And I undertook a number of different roles. I started off on the strategy team, but went through to the planning and more business development side, and was actively engaged in some of the work that we did to try and get the finances back in order for Railtrack. And then as Railtrack moved into administration, I was then very much working actually with Deutsche Bank and the administrators, Ernst & Young, to put together plans to make the future of what became Network Rail, reality. So putting together some of the work, and of course on the other side of that, the Network Rail team led by Ian Coucher were putting together a plan to bid for the business. And those things came together in the new Railtrack, in the new Network Rail. And from then, of course, as Network Rail came in, and Ian Coucher led that huge program of transformation, again, there was some huge challenges to deliver. So I got quite heavily involved actually in how we might move forward maintenance and make it much more effective and much more efficient. And from that came the plan to bring maintenance in-house. And if you cast your mind back to 2004, we brought around 18 maintenance contractors in-house on the same day as we completely flipped the organisation from what was a regional and a locally based organisation to something that was much more functionally based. And that all happened on, I think it was May the 24th, 2004. Right. So there you are. It's not my mind. Somebody watching this will probably tell me that's the wrong day. But anyway, that's how it's logged in my mind. That's when it happened for you, yeah. That's when it happened. And I was quite, involved then at helping to set up the new maintenance organisation. And from there moved into transformation. I spent a while as head of risk for Network Rail, and I had a bit of a background in that from my pre-industry days, and we implemented a new risk management plan throughout our company. And then I moved into transformation, and I was leading the world-class transformation program for a couple of years, and until actually the time came, it was the right thing to do to move on. So I went to London Underground, where I led another transformation program. That was when they were bringing Metronet in-house. If you remember, the public-private partnership had come to an end. Metronet came in-house, and I was leading the transformation of commercial and procurement functions. So that was quite interesting to see London Underground, which had many similarities with the culture and the operation, as a railway, as it is, but was perhaps in a different space in its time of development. So that was a really interesting opportunity.
I bet it was. I bet. And to have come from the kind of the track side of things to then start to experience that the more of the operational railway in a time of massive transformation, it just must have been again just a really interesting, and I would imagine quite a fast-paced kind of thing. I don't reckon, certainly as long as I've known you, you definitely strike me as someone who's never worked a 9 to 5 in your life. These are massive jobs, aren't they? Huge jobs that you must get a huge amount of satisfaction from looking back and saying, yeah, I was a part of that.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that there's always time pressure, isn't it? Because by definition, if you're making changes and transforming activities, then you're doing it to make improvements, and you always want those as soon as possible. So yeah, there never seems to be spare time. Although actually, ironically, of course, I thought I knew about deadlines, but my next role was then to join First Group as a bid director, and I realised I really knew nothing about deadlines until I did that role. And obviously, franchise bidding is fairly notorious in the industry. I mean, I was really lucky in that. I should say fortunate rather than lucky, but First Group and the First Rail Division team has just a great bunch of people who first of all, are really good and knowledgeable about the industry. And so it was a really good team to work with. And the first bid that I led, I had a lot of people around me who had done this before. And to be honest, we had a lot of fun doing it as well. I mean, it was really hard work, but we did have a lot of fun, and that comes from working with people and working under deadline pressures.
So which was the first bid, Caroline, when you went to First Group as bid director? Which was the first bid you worked on?
Well, I actually was recruited to work on East Anglia because I lived in East Anglia for 30 to 40 years up to that point, and I commuted for 10 years on from Ipswich into London. But in fact, that was turned into an operations contract, which we decided not to bid for. So my first bid was the West Coast 2012 bid, which was obviously quite a key moment for franchise bidding in the industry. We got to the end of that, and it was ultimately we'd won and been announced as the winners, and then ultimately it was cancelled, which was obviously hugely disappointing, but also, as most people remember, led to very significant reverberations through the industry, and it took another couple of years for franchising to get going again. And then after that, I worked on the Thameslink bid, and then also on East Anglia, which finally came through as a full bid. Thoroughly enjoyed doing that, and still look back on that as something very proud. Actually, we didn't win, but you sometimes that's not in your control. But we had a very capable and experienced team by then, and really enjoyed that. And then, as you say, in 2018. The additional challenge of the West Coast Partnership bid, which was again very exciting because yes, it was a franchise bid and it was for West Coast, but to have the opportunity then to incorporate this shadow operator element, which brings a degree of complexity, but also huge opportunity and huge interest. It was great to have the opportunity to lead that, and of course, as you say, last year to be announced as the First Trenitalia. As the winning bid was just great news. Yeah, which has led on to today.
So. Absolutely, yeah, and huge congratulations. I was over the moon for you when that announcement came through, because I knew how much it meant to you personally as well as professionally. You had put your heart and soul into it. So tell us about your job now. What does the MD of the shadow operator do every day?
I don't think there is an everyday actually, but I mean, I guess the first thing that most people will be asking is, well, what is the West Coast Partnership Development? And as you said, a lot of people will have heard it being described as the shadow operator for High Speed 2, but we're still very much the new kid on the block. So we're part of that West Coast Partnership, which was launched last December. And most people will be more familiar with the other side of the business, which is Avanti West Coast, of course, the intercity operator that connects some of the UK's biggest cities, London, Liverpool, Manchester, Glasgow, and others that I haven't mentioned. But the role of the shadow operator, West Coast Partnership Development, is very much about planning and delivering the high-speed services that will use the new high-speed 2 infrastructure. And we'll also be working on the intercity and regional services that will need to change so that they complement and everything works together to give the customers the best possible service, really. So as part of that, we're working really closely with High Speed 2 Limited themselves, with the Department for Transport, with Network Rail, and also with people and communities all along the West Coast Main Line. So, it's a really exciting opportunity, and it's the next chapter, if you like, in the rail story for Great Britain.
Yeah. I think it's really exciting. And I think when we talk to candidates about West Coast Partnership Development, it always, for me, my description is that you started off with a blank piece of paper almost, in terms of you are building this operating company. And I know certainly some of the stuff that I'm aware of that's in discussion feels like such an exciting opportunity to reimagine what the railway could look like. And obviously the whole industry is now going through massive change and opportunity to reimagine. But for the shadow operator, that just feels like you're right up there in terms of knowing everything we know and everything we've learned. What do we want this train operating company to look like? And I just think that's an incredibly exciting piece of work. In terms of the whole industry, and over the last 8 or 9 months, obviously, it has been through a tumultuous time with the COVID pandemic, everything that's happened as a result of that. So many people have said to me that they believe that presents us as an industry with a huge opportunity. It's quite time bound. I think we're kind of thinking 12 to 18 months to sort ourselves out, if you like, to make some decisions and imagine what we can do. What would you say are the key opportunities, Caroline, looking at it from your perspective? What do you think are the opportunities for rail as we move forward now?
Yeah, as you say, a huge time and a huge potential, Nina. And I think what's interesting is that when COVID hit, we were the industry was on the cusp of the changes to come through potentially from the Williams review, and franchising has been massively, really successful. If you look back, over those 20 odd years since privatisation, the improvements that we've seen through investment in rolling stock and the improvements in customer experience and satisfaction and punctuality and safety have been really amazing. And of course, actually, what COVID, I think, has done to some extent is to accelerate now the opportunity to then move to a different franchising model and build again. What's the next step change? I think it's really important that, as you said, there's fairly sort of time limited opportunity to, get back to saying, well, what is that next, customer improvement and how? I think the real opportunity we need to make sure is that we don't lose the best of what we've had in the last 20 odd years. So, if you look at the innovation and the commercial focus that we've been able to access some of that from the private sector. So I think it's really important that we keep the ability and all of the good and strong capabilities that we've developed over the last 20 years. We don't go back to that level of immaturity that we saw at the beginning of franchising. I think there's a really big opportunity around pricing and ticketing. We know the complexity of fares, the difficulties around split ticketing has generated a lack of trust with customers. They don't always feel they're getting the right ticket at the right price. And there's a big step change to come in terms of the digital ticketing revolution. And I think, as we've got this kind of almost pause in franchising, and whilst that's been very successful, it also puts limitations around what you can do, in this 5 or 7 year period. That for me is probably the biggest opportunity that we can grasp. But there are other things as well. I think there are opportunities for our people, in helping them to move forward. We've got to make sure that the changes that are made, do the right things for them, so that we've got, an attractive industry that gives people really fulfilling careers. And of course it does that to a great extent already, but we've got to keep building on that and building the skills, so that people can feel that they're really sharing in that success and they're a part of it, not being done to, if you like. So I think that's another opportunity. And then, stakeholder engagement. I think the West Coast Partnership is really interesting. It does set a new framework for the way that we engage with stakeholders, that some of our incentives are built around that. And of course, that's been widened through the recent contractual arrangements that DfT have put in place for the recovery agreements. So I think it'd be really good to see us building on that and finding new ways, so that we're making sure that what the rail industry delivers is connecting towns and cities in the right way and meeting their aspirations for economic growth, which of course, post-COVID, accelerating that economic growth and getting the benefits that rail, brings is going to be really important.
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen a few webinars and seminars and things over the last few months where you've been involved in talking about the growth in communities along the West Coast line. I think this feels like a whole different conversation for me, because I've been working in the rail industry for 8 years now, so I'm still very much the new girl, but I think it took me to come into it to understand how integral it is to the economy. I was also, one of the massive surprises for me was how political it is, how much the politicians get involved in the industry. It was a surprise for me, but I've been really encouraged by all of the information that's coming out, all the conversation about bringing those communities together and how the West Coast Main Line can support the growth of the economy. There's some really positive conversations happening around that, which is really great to see. And I'm with you on the people bit as well. And, I've been described as an evangelist for rail. So I'm kind of all about getting people to come and work for the sector. But I think as an industry, we've probably kept it a big secret that there are really exciting roles to do in rail. And so the more that secret's getting out, is quite interesting for me, people wanting to identify roles within rail who, certainly 4 or 5 years ago, we would have had to try really hard to encourage them to come into the industry. Whereas now people are approaching us saying, we'd like to work with your clients. So these things are definitely starting to turn around in that respect. So over the last period of time, huge opportunity for learning. We're all doing things differently. I mean, even, you and I having this conversation, looking at each other on a computer screen rather than sat in an office or a nice restaurant in London. What, for you, Caroline, what have you learned, whether that's kind of professionally or personally? What have been the key learnings for you over the last few months?
Well, I guess the first thing to say, Nina, is that it's been a real privilege, really, to witness the agility and the robustness of the industry through this period. I mean, I'm not directly involved in the operational aspects, but to see the way that our rail operators and Network Rail, effectively were able to almost turn on a pinhead with the way that they change the services, and people don't realise how difficult it is behind the scenes, to change the diagrams and the rosters and everything else that was going on at that time with the timetables and keep the service going so that key workers and others could travel through that time of real lockdown. So I think it shouldn't have been a surprise that we were able to do that, but I don't think we've ever had to rise to quite that challenge. And it was fantastic to see the front line every day, just keeping on delivering it and supporting customers and keeping customers safe and cleaning the trades much better. So I wouldn't say that was a surprise, but that was a fantastic thing to witness. And I think also actually we've managed to build up the services again as we've been trying to exit from this situation. And we've seen across so many industries and for the government as well, how difficult, and at a personal level, how difficult it is to, you could go into lockdown, but coming out of it's hard. And actually, I think the industry's done a great job of stepping the service back up, keeping all of the resources and the rolling stock and everything else in tandem with that. So I think that's been great to see. I think, for people like my team, I mean, we're involved very much. We do design and development work, and that's rather like consulting work. So at one level, it lends itself to working from home. And I think the technology has worked way better. I mean, if you said to me the day before we all went home, what did I think it was going to be like? I'd have thought it was going to be really very hard. And I think in many ways we adapted quite quickly to the mechanics of getting onto Zoom and team calls and doing things at a distance. And although I think what we learned was that is a lot more draining and somehow intense than we'd anticipated it being. But the other side of it is what you miss is the interaction with people. The chance conversations by the coffee machine, or the ability to catch people in the corridor, and certainly being creative, I think, is so much more difficult at a distance. You don't get that bouncing off each other. So I think it's gone better than I could have predicted, but we're just champing at the bit now, and to get back into seeing each other. And I think I'd say that reads across to personal life. I think there were so many things that we took for granted, and you and I were talking earlier, but the ability to just meet your friends or meet your family. I mean, Christmas is coming up and we're now all, can we see our families? Whereas quite, previously there was a bit of, it's Christmas, it's the family, are we going to survive? And I think actually really come to appreciate some of those things which seem quite casual and I've certainly taken for granted. And I guess finally, the other thing that's been quite a great pleasure. I mean, I enjoy being outside and I enjoy outdoor activities. But I have some great picnics this summer. Initially out of necessity, that was the only way to meet. But actually, I had to, I bought a special little carrier, for my picnic, my individually packed, socially distanced picnic lunch. But what a great pleasure that's been, even sometimes when it's been raining or not the best of weathers, to just meet other people outdoors and relax and do something that actually feels quite normal, if you like.
Yeah. So Caroline, in terms of obviously your day-to-day role, albeit remotely for the last few months, is that of a leader. And I've seen you in full flow as the bid director and the leadership skills that takes. Obviously, in your new role, that's the key element as well. What I'm really interested to know is, over your career, there will have been people that you have learnt from, and that sometimes they've kind of role modelled how to do leadership. On occasion, there might have been other people that have modelled how not to do it, and things that you've picked up there that, I wouldn't do that. So I'm interested to know your views on your style of leadership, but where it came from. What do you appreciate about leadership styles in other people?
Yeah, thanks for that. That's a really hard question, isn't it? And I'm going to cheat a little bit, actually, because what I'm going to do is really go back to my parents, if you like, because I think sometimes the earliest influences in our lives, are the most significant, aren't they? And of course, there have been many people along the way, but it's quite interesting thinking about that. And both my parents were involved in education, so my mum was a teacher, my dad's a lecturer, so education and learning was really important. I've realised that, you know, for me, an enjoyable job and an enjoyable environment is one where there's just opportunities to learn every day. And I think, you know, as we said earlier, that's one of the great things for me about the industry. And the thing is, you can learn from anyone and everyone. So, you know, it can be somebody that you work for, it could be somebody who's been in the industry 20 years, or it can be somebody who's arrived yesterday. You know, everybody's got something to teach us and that we can learn from. So getting better and just seeing new perspectives, I think is really important. I also realised that my dad in particular was a scientist. And I realised that from a very young age, I was expected to have a rational argument for anything that I wanted. And in many ways, you know, actually that's stood me in really good stead, because, you know, particularly if you look around bidding or business cases or anything like that, actually you have to construct a very rational argument. I'm sure sometimes my team swear about that a little bit, but they would definitely recognise that. I think the other thing is that my parents, in all of that, even when I was quite young, treated me very much as an equal. And that was something that they extended to everybody. And possibly that comes from their background. So, you know, for example, my granddad started work in a mine at the age of 14. And I think that probably gives you a certain outlook on life. And I can remember my dad in particular used to say fairly frequently something along the lines of, you know, treating people equally doesn't mean treating them the same. And I think that's such a powerful phrase and a kind of philosophy, really. And actually, when you get later on in life and you get into some of the management theory around managing people and everything, actually, that's the point, isn't it? You know, that old adage of do as you would be done by is not very helpful when you're working with other people, because they're not all like you or me in this case. So, yeah, realising that actually people need to be treated differently, to be treated with equal respect and you know, to get, you know, for them to develop and get fulfilment out of their role.
I absolutely love that. I think it's so important, and it kind of comes into so many conversations that I'm actually having with my daughter at the moment around, you know, just as she's learning, she's 17, she's doing sociology, history and law A-levels, and there's some really interesting topics that are in there. And we've been having some really robust debates around what equality means. So I'm going to repeat that quote from your dad the next time we're having a robust conversation.
Yeah, I have no idea where he got it from, or whether that was his own kind of philosophy on life per se. That's one of the things about your parents, isn't it? Is that when you're young, they know everything, and they are the fount of all knowledge. And then as you grow up, you realise, well, that's not necessarily the case, but doesn't mean that they were wrong. So.
No, I bet there was some really great conversations went round your dinner table when you were at home with your parents, Caroline. Great. So you've actually given me a fabulous quote there. But as we're reaching the end of our conversation today, I would love you to share with me. Is there another quote that you go back to? Is there one of your own personal favourites that might inspire you or motivate you, or just kind of something you rely on just to make you feel better?
Yeah, well, funny actually with this one, because I have 4 pictures on my bedroom wall. And I realised one of the reasons they're on my bedroom wall is I quite like to kind of see them early in the morning. So I think if I tell you what those 4 pictures are, it'll give you an interesting kind of view on what drives me. So one of them is a picture entitled "Happily Dying of Chocolate." So I like my creature comforts. The second one is a picture of a kingfisher sitting on top of a sign that says "No fishing." So there's a little bit of kind of rebellion there. The other is the daily call, which is first I drink the coffee and then I do the things. So coffee is really important motivating factor. And then the last one is actually a Peanuts cartoon. And it finishes with Lucy taking Charlie Brown up to the top of a hill. And she says, "Look at this world. Do you see any other world?" "No, Lucy." She says, she shouts as Lucy does, "Well, live in it then." And I think that's just such a great quote for every day.
I love it. Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you for that. I always enjoy our conversations. You always make me think. And it's been really lovely to have this opportunity to have a chat with you amongst all the madness that's going on. Really lovely to have a chat and just kind of catch up, hear your story and hear your thoughts on where we are and what the opportunities are. Hugely grateful to you for joining me, Caroline. Thank you very much indeed.
Well, thank you. Always great to have that. You know, it's in fact, you're like Lucy the therapist, aren't you? I can sit and talk about myself for half an hour.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. A huge thanks to Caroline for sharing her thoughts and her own personal insights and learnings from the last few months. The next episode of Intuitive Insights will be with you in 2 weeks' time, when I'm joined by Steve White, Chief Operating Officer for GTR.